Some hotels weren't just for sleeping. They were built for watching, listening, and vanishing into the crowd. Behind chandeliers and clinking glasses, real wars played out, not with armies, but with whispers, coded notes, and hidden compartments. From St. Ermin's in London, where MI6 stored explosives, to the Palácio Estoril in neutral Portugal, where Allied and Axis spies gambled side by side, these elegant buildings hid the heart of global espionage. We'll step inside the bars, suites, and corridors where secrets changed hands and where shadows still linger. In the winter of 1942, London was a city at war, but still clung to the rituals of peacetime. Inside St. Ermin's Hotel, men in tailored suits and women in silk dresses gathered in the Caxton Bar. Cigarette smoke curled to the ceiling, glasses clinked, a pianist played a quiet tune in the corner. No one in the room gave a thought to the floors above, where a dangerous stockpile of explosives waited. The hotel's guests, many of them in government or military service, were part of a network that worked in plain sight. Some drank to forget the war. Others listened, watched, and passed messages. The hotel had long served as a meeting point for agents and informers, its central location and discreet service making it ideal for covert exchanges. Far from London, across the continent, Lisbon played a different role in the conflict. Portugal remained neutral, and its capital became a crossroads for exiles, refugees, and intelligence officers. The Palácio Estoril, a grand hotel just outside the city, hosted an unusual mix of visitors. At its gaming tables, men in tuxedos sat across from women in sequined gowns. Cards moved from hand to hand, and chips stacked neatly in front of players. Around them, waiters poured champagne while keeping an ear on conversations. In the corners of the room, men lit cigarettes and studied their opponents, not only their betting habits but their accents, mannerisms, and any stray remarks. Both Allied and Axis agents moved easily here. The hotel's position on the coast offered another advantage. Ships bound for the Americas often departed nearby. A man could play cards in the evening, pass a coded message at midnight, and be on a vessel to New York the next day. Back in London, at the old War Office, Winston Churchill leaned over a large map. The room smelled of tobacco and ink. A team of officers stood by as he traced a finger along the coast of Europe. His voice was steady as he repeated the phrase he had used before, "Set Europe ablaze." It was his shorthand for sabotage, resistance support, and the infiltration of enemy-held territories. Plans for these operations often began in the War Office but moved into less obvious spaces, hotel rooms, private lounges, and quiet dining rooms where formal dress and polite conversation provided cover. A typed memorandum could be hidden in a book. A rendezvous could be disguised as a dinner date. The thin walls of even the most refined hotels often heard whispers that never made it into public records. The link between luxury hotels and espionage was not accidental. Such places attracted people with influence, wealth, or secrets to hide. Their public areas provided opportunities for observation. Their private suites allowed for secure talks away from official offices. A businessman from Stockholm could meet a diplomat from Madrid without raising suspicion if they happened to be staying under the same roof. Staff often knew more than they revealed. A porter might notice a suitcase heavier on one day than the last. A maid might see a map spread out on a bed where no tourist would need one. A telephone operator could overhear a message meant to be confidential. Some of these employees passed their observations to handlers on one side or another. Consider an evening at St. Ermin's in those years. Two men might sit near the window with whiskey glasses in hand. Their conversation could seem to drift from cricket scores to mutual acquaintances. In truth, they might be exchanging details about a resistance courier scheduled to arrive in France. A woman at the bar might be reading a newspaper, yet she could be marking certain advertisements with a pencil, codes agreed upon with a contact in the city. Across the hall, a man in a military uniform could be playing cards with strangers, winning or losing small amounts while noting who leaves the table when a certain name is mentioned. The setting did not betray the stakes of their exchanges. In Lisbon, the Palácio Estoril had its own rhythm. The war felt distant in the warm air of the casino, yet it hovered in the glances exchanged at the tables. A German officer might lean close to whisper in French to a woman who worked for British intelligence. She might smile and answer in a language that was not her own, turning each phrase in a way that revealed more than it seemed. A visiting American businessman might invite a Spanish diplomat for a drink, claiming to discuss shipping routes. In the quiet of a private lounge, the conversation could shift to troop movements, naval blockades, or the movements of a mutual acquaintance who happened to be a courier for a spy ring. The old War Office served as the formal heart of these efforts, but its plans depended on the informal networks maintained in hotels. Churchill's strategy relied on sending small, trained teams into occupied territory to work with local resistance. Hotels became the staging grounds for briefings, the first meeting point for recruits, and the last safe place for agents before dangerous missions. An agent might check in under a false name, spend a night in a room where maps and false documents were laid out on the bed, and leave before dawn. If questioned, the front desk might confirm that the guest had simply departed early to catch a train. The architecture of these hotels often played a role in their use. St. Ermin's had multiple entrances and exits, allowing someone to arrive at one door and leave through another without being seen. The Palácio Estoril's wide verandas provided open spaces for conversations that could not be easily overheard. Raffles London at the old War Office, later in the war, would offer suites with interconnecting rooms, perfect for moving between spaces without passing through public corridors. Such features were not designed for espionage, yet they became part of the trade. The people who moved through these corridors and bars were often skilled in blending in. A trained agent could sit through an entire dinner without revealing their true purpose. They learned to remember faces, gestures, and scraps of conversation while seeming absorbed in small talk. They knew how to arrange a meeting that looked accidental and how to part without anyone noticing the exchange of a small envelope or folded paper. In these settings, the boundary between social life and espionage blurred. A casual flirtation could be the cover for a handoff. A dispute over a card game could be staged to allow someone to leave the table and pass a message in the hall. The risks were constant. A single overheard phrase could lead to arrest. A trusted contact could turn out to be a double agent. Yet the setting of a grand hotel gave a sense of safety, a stage where each person played their part. Guests could tell themselves they were only sharing drinks, playing cards, or enjoying music. In truth, the walls, floors, and ceilings of these buildings absorbed the movements of a shadow war that shaped the course of history. A grand hotel is a stage where hundreds of lives cross paths without ever touching. For an intelligence officer, that constant movement is a shield. Strangers check in and out every day, their names recorded in ledgers but rarely remembered by staff for long. A man can arrive from Madrid, stay 2 nights, and vanish without drawing attention. A woman can step into a lobby wearing a travel coat, walk straight through to a side exit, and be gone before anyone notices she never went to the desk. The same anonymity that protects wealthy tourists protects operatives who need to pass unseen. Location adds to the advantage. Many of the great hotels sit close to government offices, embassies, railway stations, and ports. This is not coincidence. These places were built to serve people of influence who travel often. For a spy, it means quick access to trains, ships, and diplomatic channels. A coded message can be handed to a courier in the lobby and be on a ship the same night. An operative meeting an embassy contact can step from the hotel dining room to an official car in less than a minute. In wartime, when information moves as quickly as it can be carried, those short distances make the difference between a message delivered in time and one intercepted too late. The buildings themselves offer tools for the trade. Private meeting rooms can be booked for business luncheons or committee gatherings, though the real agenda may be the exchange of sensitive material. Service corridors allow staff to move unnoticed, and those same passages can be used by operatives who need to bypass public areas. Multiple exits mean a man under watch can leave by the kitchen door while his observer waits at the front. A skilled officer studies the layout on arrival, where the stairs meet the side halls, how the lifts connect to back passages, which doors lock and which do not. Even the daily services of a hotel can be turned into channels for covert work. Room service becomes a courier system when a waiter delivers a tray with a sealed envelope tucked under the bread plate. Housekeeping can place or remove items without raising suspicion. A laundry bag can hide microfilm in its folds. Conference rooms set aside for corporate meetings are useful for briefings that require a quiet space, but not the formality of an office. In the bar, drinks and casual talk can lead to recruitment. An agent might strike up a conversation with a lonely traveler, test their views, and decide whether they are useful. The bar's noise and movement make it hard for anyone to overhear more than a word or two. The Hotel Metropole in Lisbon held such scenes often during the Second World War. Its dining hall was bright with white tablecloths and polished cutlery. Men and women sat at small tables, speaking in low tones. An operative might be seated with a journalist discussing a harmless news item. Within the flow of that talk, a single phrase, agreed upon in advance, would be slipped in. To a casual listener, it could seem like an odd choice of words. To the intended recipient, it meant that a certain agent had arrived safely or that a coded cable had been sent. The rest of the conversation could drift back to weather or politics without drawing notice. No paper changed hands, no obvious signal was given, yet the information moved from one person to another across a shared lunch. Such methods worked because they fitted the natural rhythms of hotel life. Guests came and went at different hours, ate in public rooms, and spoke in half-private tones that blended into the background. Staff were expected to be discreet, and many saw more than they said. A maitre d' might note that two guests never seemed to speak until dessert, when a short exchange took place. A bellboy might be told to deliver a package to a room and forget he ever saw it. Some were paid for their silence, others stayed quiet out of habit. Lisbon in the early 1940s became famous for this atmosphere. Ian Fleming, who served in British naval intelligence before writing spy novels, called it a nest of spies. In such a nest, hotels were the branches and hollows where the creatures of that world found shelter. At the Metropole, at the Palácio Estoril, and in smaller pensions, agents from opposing sides could sit within sight of one another, each pretending not to notice. A German officer might be in the lobby reading a paper, while a British agent passed behind him on the way to the lift. Both might know exactly who the other was, but the rules of that unspoken game kept them from open confrontation. The mechanics of tradecraft in these spaces relied on blending the extraordinary into the ordinary. A note written on thin paper could be hidden inside a matchbook and left on a bar counter. A phone call placed from the hotel's switchboard could be routed through an operator who recognized a code in the caller's choice of words. A suitcase could be left in a cloakroom for an hour, during which its contents might be swapped. None of these actions would seem strange in a hotel where guests were always on the move. Even the architecture helped mask such work. Many grand hotels had mezzanines or raised balconies in their lobbies. From there, a watcher could see who came and went without being seen in turn. Thick carpets muffled footsteps in hallways, making it possible to approach a door quietly. In older buildings, walls were often thin enough to catch fragments of the conversation next door, especially if the speaker forgot to lower his voice. An operative with patience could sit in his room and learn much from the muffled tones beyond the wall. The combination of anonymity, access, and architecture made grand hotels a natural stage for intelligence work. They offered a steady turnover of faces, the convenience of central locations, and spaces that could be used without arousing suspicion. A skilled operative could enter such a place, conduct his business, and leave with nothing to mark his presence, except a line in a guest register and perhaps a charge for drinks on the room bill. In cities like Lisbon, London, and Geneva, where spies moved as easily as tourists, the line between guest and agent often depended on who was watching. St. Ermin's Hotel has a history that stretches back to 1889, when it was originally built as luxury flats. The building, designed in a grand style, quickly became a sought-after address. Just a decade later, in 1899, it was transformed into a hotel, a decision that would set the stage for its later role in the shadowy world of espionage. Situated in Westminster, St. Ermin's was ideally located near Parliament, MI5 headquarters, and later, MI6's headquarters. Its position made it an attractive venue for government officials, diplomats, and military personnel, all of whom could easily access the political heart of London. The hotel's proximity to these critical locations made it an ideal setting for secret meetings and covert operations. The hotel's role in intelligence work began to take shape during World War I. In that conflict, St. Ermin's was briefly repurposed as a hospital, but more than a place to treat the wounded, it became a gathering point for intelligence officers. In those chaotic years, the hotel provided a space for officers to meet, share information, and exchange ideas. The hallways echoed with whispers, and the hotel rooms were transformed into quiet spots for briefings. The war may have brought disruption to much of London, but St. Ermin's remained a key site for those working behind the scenes. In the 1930s, the hotel took on a new nickname, the Works Canteen, a reference that tied directly to its growing role in the world of espionage. MI6 officers began using the hotel as an unofficial headquarters, finding its private rooms and discreet setting perfect for the delicate nature of their work. The officers who frequented the hotel had a particular task, gathering intelligence on the rising threat from Nazi Germany. But more than that, they were preparing for an escalating conflict that would demand all the tradecraft they had learned and refined. By 1938, the role of St. Ermin's in the world of espionage became even more defined. Section D of MI6, a special division focused on sabotage operations, took over the hotel's top floors. These men were experts in demolitions, and their work was critical in undermining Nazi forces across Europe. They planned sabotage missions and executed operations that aimed to disrupt enemy supply lines, communication, and transportation networks. But perhaps the most surprising part of their work was that they operated just above the rooms of the hotel's unsuspecting guests. The top floors, where explosives and demolition materials were stored, were directly above the rooms where diplomats, businessmen, and other guests went about their day. The mix of secretive intelligence operations and the everyday bustle of hotel life created a strange duality, one that few could ever have imagined. The storage of explosives just above guest rooms seems almost reckless in hindsight, but it worked. The guests, who stayed unaware of the intelligence work happening above them, came and went as though they were in any other hotel. Meanwhile, MI6 officers, covert aides, and the occasional informant moved through the hotel's rooms, hallways, and lounges, continuing their work under the radar. In the shadows, there were meetings, planning sessions, and brief exchanges of critical intelligence. And above them, explosives were prepared, ready for use in the ongoing fight against the Axis powers. As the years passed, St. Ermin's became not only a symbol of London's resilience during the war, but also a crucial site for British intelligence. It provided a level of discretion that government buildings could not. Its blend of high society and low-level secrecy made it the perfect place for agents to work without attracting attention. The blend of luxury and espionage created an atmosphere that few would have guessed at the time. Guests relaxed with drinks, but around them, spies plotted and planned. The hotel's significance in espionage was not just due to its location or architecture. The very nature of a hotel, its transient guests, its private spaces, its ability to cater to all kinds of people, made it an ideal cover for intelligence work. Agents, diplomats, and military personnel could all pass through without raising suspicion. Staff were trained to be discreet, and most guests were too absorbed in their own concerns to notice the subtle exchanges of intelligence happening all around them. Even as the hotel continued to serve its more traditional role, its status as a hub of covert operations continued. During World War II, it was an important center for those who sought to undermine the enemy in every possible way. It was more than just a place to stay. It was a place where the future of Europe was shaped in secret. The legacy of St. Ermin's as a location for intelligence work is an important part of the hotel's history. From its early days as luxury flats to its later role as a strategic point for MI6, the hotel was never just a place to rest. It was, and still is, a building steeped in the quiet history of espionage. Today, visitors may walk through its grand halls and see its luxurious decor, but the shadows of its past remain, quiet, unnoticed, and always waiting just below the surface. In 1940, With much of Europe under Nazi control, Winston Churchill decided Britain needed a new kind of weapon. That weapon would not be a bomb or a gun, but an organization built to strike at the enemy from the shadows. The Special Operations Executive was created by merging Section D of MI6 with other departments that already had experience in sabotage, propaganda, and irregular warfare. Its purpose was to support and organize resistance movements in occupied countries, disrupt German supply lines, and make it dangerous for the enemy to hold captured territory. Churchill gave it a clear mission in 5 words: set Europe ablaze. The new organization worked out of multiple sites across London, but one of its most important bases was hidden in plain sight. St. Ermin's Hotel, already familiar to intelligence officers, became home to an entire floor of SOE offices. To anyone asking questions, it was simply the Statistical Research Department, a name designed to suggest dull work involving ledgers and reports. In reality, the rooms behind those doors were filled with maps, coded messages, and plans for some of the most daring missions of the war. One such mission was the sabotage of the Vemork heavy water plant in Norway. The Germans were using the plant to produce heavy water, a key ingredient for developing nuclear weapons. SOE teams worked with Norwegian resistance fighters to plan an attack that would destroy the facility without killing civilians. The plan involved parachuting in a small team during the winter, navigating through snow-covered mountains, and planting explosives on the plant's machinery. It was a high-risk operation, but it succeeded. The loss of the heavy water supply slowed the German atomic program and removed a dangerous threat. Another operation planned within St. Ermin's walls targeted one of the most feared figures in the Nazi regime, Reinhard Heydrich, the acting governor of occupied Czechoslovakia and one of the architects of the Holocaust. Heydrich's control over the region was brutal, and his removal was seen as both a moral and strategic necessity. SOE officers worked with Czech and Slovak agents to prepare the mission. The operatives were trained, equipped, and dropped into Czechoslovakia under cover of darkness. On the 27th of May 1942, they ambushed Heydrich's car in Prague, mortally wounding him. The operation came at a terrible cost. The Nazis carried out brutal reprisals, but it proved that no one in the Nazi hierarchy was beyond reach. SOE's work also extended to France in preparation for the Allied invasion of 1944. Operation Jedburgh was a series of missions in which 3-person teams made up of British, American, and French operatives parachuted into occupied France. Each team linked up with local resistance groups, providing weapons, training, and coordination for sabotage missions. These teams blew up railway lines, cut communications, and ambushed German convoys, all aimed at delaying reinforcements to the Normandy front after D-Day. The planning for these missions required precise coordination, safe landing zones, local contacts, and timing that matched the needs of the Allied advance. Women played a vital role in SOE operations, taking on responsibilities that went far beyond the support roles traditionally assigned to them. Krystyna Skarbek, a Polish-born agent, became one of SOE's most remarkable operatives. Working under the name Christine Granville, she carried messages, organized resistance networks, and gathered intelligence in occupied territories. She once talked her way out of execution by convincing her captors she was related to a high-ranking British official, then immediately returned to her work. Skarbek and other women in SOE often operated in civilian clothing, using false identities to pass through enemy checkpoints, deliver explosives, or collect information. They were trained in weapons, sabotage, and unarmed combat, skills rarely taught to women in that era. Inside St. Ermin's, the work never stopped. Maps were marked with supply drop zones. Radio sets were tested before being shipped to agents in the field. Forged documents were inspected to ensure they would pass under enemy scrutiny. Training schedules were written, listing lessons in demolitions, cryptography, and clandestine communication. Couriers came and went, carrying sealed envelopes that might hold orders for a mission in Greece or a list of equipment to be sent to Yugoslav partisans. The hotel's normal life continued just floors below. Guests ordered tea, met for drinks, or arranged dinners. Few, if any, suspected that the people walking briskly through the upper corridors were planning acts of sabotage across the continent. The front desk took messages for statistical research, And those messages might be simple supply requests or coded signals that an operation had succeeded. Even the housekeeping staff could pass through SOE areas without knowing they were stepping into one of the most secret parts of Britain's war effort. Churchill's decision to form the SOE and hide some of its work in a central London hotel reflected his belief in unconventional warfare. He understood that traditional armies alone could not win the war. The enemy had to be weakened from within. By using St. Ermin's as one of their bases, SOE officers could meet contacts without drawing the attention that came with visiting a government building. The blend of open public space and closed private rooms allowed them to operate discreetly in the heart of the city. The operations born in those rooms often depended on the smallest details. The success of a sabotage mission might hinge on the timing of a train or the placement of a single charge. The assassination of a high-ranking official might require weeks of planning for a few seconds of action. The parachuting of an agent into occupied territory meant aligning the work of pilots, intelligence officers, resistance leaders, and supply crews. In each case, failure meant not just the loss of the mission, but the lives of those involved. That pressure shaped the work done in St. Ermin's, giving every conversation and every sheet of paper a weight that could not be seen from outside. The SOE's presence in the hotel gave the building a place in history beyond its walls and decor. It became a nerve center for a war fought in the shadows, where victories were measured in disrupted supply lines, derailed trains, and enemy commanders who never made it home. From the top floors of a Westminster hotel, Churchill's order to set Europe ablaze was turned into action across the continent. In the quiet corners of St. Ermin's today, glass cases display the tools once carried by men and women sent into enemy territory. Each object looks ordinary at first glance. An old pair of RAF flying boots rests on a stand. The leather is worn, the soles scuffed from use. Only a closer look reveals the hidden feature, a slim knife tucked inside a concealed pocket at the top of the boot. In enemy territory, this could cut through bindings, open a crate, or serve as a last defense if capture seemed certain. The design allowed an agent to move without suspicion, carrying a weapon in plain sight. On another shelf, a hairbrush sits upright, its bristles intact. It could have sat on any dressing table in Britain in the 1940s. Yet the back of the brush opens to reveal a narrow compartment holding a tiny saw and a small compass. The saw could cut through a thin metal bar or wooden restraint, while the compass offered a way to navigate if escape became possible. Carried in a bag or left in a hotel room, it was an unremarkable item with the power to save a life. Nearby lies a tobacco pipe, its stem worn smooth by use. Inside the bowl, a false bottom hides a cavity large enough to hold a folded note or a microfilm strip. A thick book sits beside it, its pages glued together and cut out to create a hollow space. In such a book, an agent could smuggle forged documents or a radio part across a border. Both objects could be placed on a desk or carried in luggage without attracting a second glance. A square of silk, soft to the touch, carries a pattern that looks at first like a decorative design. In reality, the lines and shapes are a printed cipher code for a radio operator. Silk was chosen because it would not tear easily, could be folded into a small space, and could be worn as a scarf without attracting attention. In the field, an agent could read the code, send a message over the airwaves, then wear the silk around the neck as though it were nothing more than a fashion accessory. Many of these designs came from Charles Fraser Smith, an inventor working in quiet partnership with British intelligence. He had a gift for turning everyday items into tools of survival and deception. His work later inspired the fictional Q in the James Bond stories, a character whose gadgets always had a mix of elegance and function. Fraser Smith's real creations were often less dramatic, but far more vital. They had to work under harsh conditions, survive close inspection, and be used by people whose lives depended on them. One display tells the story of an SOE operative parachuting into occupied Europe under a moonless sky. In his coat lining were sewn forged identity papers for multiple false identities. One set might allow him to pass as a local factory worker, another as a minor railway official, each with names, stamps, and signatures carefully copied to match enemy records. If stopped by a patrol, He could choose which identity suited the moment. The documents were thin, folded flat, and placed between the fabric layers so they could not be felt by a casual search. The code itself looked ordinary, yet it was as important to his survival as any weapon. From the upper floors of St. Ermin's, where SOE officers worked under the cover of statistical research, such items were tested, issued, and refined. Agents arriving for briefings might be shown how to open the false compartment in a hairbrush without breaking it, or how to read a cipher code on silk without drawing attention. The hotel's quiet meeting rooms became places where these tools passed from the hands of designers to those who would carry them into danger. The thinking behind these gadgets was simple. An agent could not look like an agent. A soldier in uniform could carry a rifle openly, but an undercover operative needed tools that could pass through enemy checkpoints without question. The best disguise was an object that seemed too common to be of interest. A German officer might glance at a pair of boots, a hairbrush, or a book without suspecting the danger it held. That moment of inattention was the gap in which an agent could act. These objects also had to be practical. The knife in a boot could not be so heavy it slowed the wearer. The compass in a hairbrush had to point true even if jostled in a bag. The silk cipher scarf had to survive rain and mud. Each design balanced concealment with function, and failure on either side could be fatal. A compass that worked but was easily found could mean exposure. A perfectly hidden tool that failed in use was worthless. In one imagined scene, a young SOE courier sits in the Caxton bar at St. Ermin's, her small suitcase at her feet. She might be waiting for a contact, her hand resting lightly on the handle. Inside the case, beneath a layer of clothes, lies a pipe with a microfilm hidden in its bowl. She could hand the pipe to a man across the table, claiming it was a gift from home. That man could then walk past a military checkpoint, light the pipe in front of a guard, and carry the film unnoticed into a safe house. The guard would remember the smoke, not the message hidden inside. Another operative might leave the hotel wearing a scarf patterned with the silk cipher. To anyone passing in the street, it would seem a small gesture of style in wartime London. Hours later, in a safe flat on the edge of the city, the same scarf could be unrolled beside a radio, its code used to send a message to France. By dawn, that message might set in motion a railway sabotage that would delay an enemy troop train for days. These devices were not just clever tricks, they were lifelines. From a base in a luxury hotel, agents were equipped to survive arrest, escape confinement, mislead the enemy, and keep the flow of information moving through occupied Europe. Each item on display at St. Ermin's today tells a story of risk, invention, and the quiet war fought far from the front lines. After the end of the Second World War, St. Ermin's kept its link to the world of intelligence. The fighting had stopped, but the new rivalry between East and West brought its own kind of battles. The Cold War did not use bombs and tanks in London. It used meetings, conversations, and the quiet passing of information. The hotel's location in Westminster and its long history with British intelligence meant it remained a natural place for agents and their contacts to meet without drawing notice. Among the figures who came through its doors in those years were members of the Cambridge Five, a group of British officials who spied for the Soviet Union. Guy Burgess, Kim Philby, and Anthony Blunt were known to spend time in the Caxton bar. The bar, with its dark wood and quiet atmosphere, suited the work of men who wanted to blend into the background. They could sit at a table with a drink, talk in low voices, and pass materials without the formality of an office or the scrutiny of a public building. Burgess had a habit of moving in circles where politics, media, and culture overlapped. His manner allowed him to hold meetings in public without seeming out of place. In the Caxton bar, he sometimes handed over government files to his Soviet handlers right at the table. The exchange could be as simple as sliding a folder across the polished surface while reaching for a cigarette case. To anyone else nearby, it might look like he was showing a friend a set of notes or a draft speech. In reality, the papers contained sensitive information that would soon be in the hands of Moscow. Philby, who had already begun his double life during the war, also left his mark on the hotel's history. His recruitment interview for MI6 took place in the forecourt of St. Ermin's. Marjorie Maxa, a senior figure in the Conservative Party and connected to intelligence circles, spoke with him there. The setting was informal, away from official offices, and it allowed both interviewer and candidate to speak freely. Philby, already working for the Soviets, passed this first step with ease. That conversation in the forecourt began a career in which he would rise high in British intelligence while feeding a steady stream of secrets to the KGB. Blunt, another member of the Cambridge Five, used the same spaces for his own purposes. His role in passing art, culture, and political gossip to Soviet contacts often began with meetings that looked no different from academic or social gatherings. The hotel's bar and lounges gave him the cover he needed. A man with his background, scholar, curator, and advisor, could meet diplomats and officials without raising suspicion. The real work took place in the small exchanges of words and papers that most guests would have overlooked. The nature of the hotel made this possible. Staff were trained to provide privacy to all guests. Meetings between 2 or 3 people in the corner of a lounge attracted little attention. The same layout that had suited SOE operations during the war now suited the quieter, longer-term games of Cold War espionage. The Caxton Bar's regulars included not just politicians and civil servants, but also journalists and foreign visitors, giving the place a mix that masked the presence of spies. There were also stories, never fully confirmed, that hinted at deeper connections between the hotel and the centers of power nearby. One rumor told of a secret tunnel linking St. Ermin's directly to Parliament. Such a passage would have allowed discreet movement between the two without passing through public streets. Whether the tunnel existed or not, the idea fit with the hotel's reputation as a place where public and hidden worlds met. In a city full of official buildings, a private route from a hotel to the heart of government would have been valuable to anyone wanting to move unseen. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the hotel remained a known point of contact. Foreign intelligence officers, both friendly and hostile, understood its role. A Soviet agent visiting London might arrange to meet a contact there, knowing it was a place where such meetings had happened before. A British officer might agree to a conversation in the same spot, confident that the surroundings would give them a degree of control. The risk was always present, but the balance of familiarity and anonymity made it useful. By the early 1960s, shifts in the way British intelligence worked began to change the hotel's role. The exposure of the Cambridge Five shook confidence in the security of many informal meeting places. New office space and more secure facilities became the norm for sensitive work. In 1964, MI6 finally moved out of St. Ermin's, ending the building's function as an active base. The rooms that had once held planning sessions, recruitment interviews, and quiet exchanges of files returned to more conventional uses. Still, the Cold War years left their mark. Stories of Burgess sliding folders across a bar table, Philby standing in the forecourt discussing his future, and Blunt leaning close to a contact over drinks became part of the building's unwritten history. The same walls that had heard the plans for wartime sabotage now held the low voices of men whose loyalties were not what they seemed. For decades after the war, St. Ermin's remained a place where the line between guest and operative could blur without anyone in the lobby being the wiser. Portugal stood apart from the war. Officially neutral, it allowed ships, trains, and planes from both Allied and Axis countries to pass through its territory. Lisbon became a city where men and women from opposite sides could walk the same streets, eat in the same cafes, and watch each other without fear of arrest. The Palácio Estoril, a grand hotel on the coast, was one of the most visible stages for this strange coexistence. Its guest list included diplomats with sealed briefcases, businessmen looking for contracts, exiled royals with little to do but gossip, and intelligence officers under assumed names. The casino inside the hotel drew them all. Its tables and roulette wheels provided the perfect excuse for strangers to meet. A man could sit down across from someone he had never spoken to and stay for hours without questions. Hands moved chips across the felt. Glasses of wine or whiskey arrived and were taken away. Between games, players leaned close to trade a few words. To the dealer, it might sound like small talk about cards or travel. To those involved, it could be a coded exchange of information. The setting made cover easy. A cash win or loss at a table could mask the transfer of funds. A folded note passed with a stack of chips could hold a rendezvous address. A map of supply routes might be concealed under a betting slip. A croupier working for British intelligence could note who met whom and which guests returned to the same table each night. Even the noise of the casino was an asset. The clatter of chips and spin of the wheel masked words that could have cost lives if overheard in a quiet room. British intelligence made use of the hotel in direct ways. Some officers posed as casino staff, blending into the background while watching the flow of players. Others worked as waiters or bellhops, delivering drinks or luggage while slipping messages between trusted hands. A room service tray could carry more than food. Beneath the plates, a small envelope might travel from one agent to another without ever leaving the building. Luggage deliveries worked the same way. A porter could bring a case to a guest's suite, but inside might be radio parts or forged documents. The case could then be forgotten in the lobby for another operative to collect. The hotel's location, close to the port of Lisbon and the train station, gave it further value. An agent could meet a contact in the morning, pass on a message, and be on a ship bound for the Americas by nightfall. In the other direction, someone arriving from neutral Switzerland or Vichy, France, could step off the train, book a room, and be at a casino table before dinner. The rapid movement of people and information made it hard to track who was working for whom. Among the guests was a young British naval officer named Ian Fleming. At the time, he served under Admiral John Godfrey in naval intelligence. Fleming watched the mix of gamblers, businessmen, and obvious agents in Estoril and saw the opportunities for deception and risk. One story has him trying to outplay German agents at the tables, a scene that would later echo in the pages of Casino Royale. In his novel, the high-stakes card game hides a deadly struggle between a British agent and an enemy operative. In Estoril, the games were real, and the stakes could be just as high, even if the weapons were papers and whispered words rather than guns. A typical day in the hotel could involve layers of activity. In the lobby, a businessman from Madrid might meet a shipping agent from London to discuss cargo deliveries. At another table, a man with a diplomatic passport could chat with a visiting writer about politics in France. In the bar, a woman traveling alone might sip a cocktail while listening for a particular phrase from a man who had just arrived. Upstairs, in one of the suites, a radio operator might be tapping out a coded message on a set hidden inside a suitcase. The hotel's staff learned to see without seeming to watch. A maid cleaning a room might note that a guest always left the same drawer locked. A waiter could notice a guest passing a small package under a napkin to another diner. Some staff passed their observations to intelligence officers. Others ignored what they saw, understanding that too many questions could be dangerous. The neutrality of Portugal meant that both sides could operate in public view. A German officer and a British spy could sit at adjacent tables in the casino, each aware of the other, each careful to keep their true business hidden. Sometimes the proximity was useful. An agent could follow an opponent without having to cross enemy lines. A meeting in Estoril could be safer than one in a hostile capital. Yet the risk was constant. A casual remark to the wrong person, a document left out of sight for too long, could end a career or a life. In such a place, even ordinary movements could carry hidden meaning. A porter leaving a case outside a door for collection might be making a simple delivery, or he could be handing off plans for a sabotage mission in occupied Europe. A tray of food left in the hall might be an unfinished meal or a signal that the courier inside was ready to receive a package. The elegance of the setting hid the urgency of the work. Guests dressed for dinner, music played, and the sea air drifted in through open windows, but beneath it all ran the quiet current of a war fought in shadows. The Palácio Estoril thrived in those years because it was both open and closed. Anyone could walk in, book a room, and take a seat at a table. At the same time, private spaces, coded language, and layers of cover stories kept the real exchanges invisible to most eyes. For the agents who passed through, it was a rare place where the enemy could be across the table, and the game, whether of cards or of survival, was worth playing. The old War Office stands on Whitehall in central London. its Edwardian Baroque facade stretching the length of the block. Completed in 1906, it was built to project the authority of Britain's military leadership. Inside, high-ceilinged corridors run in long, straight lines, their marble floors echoing with footsteps. Offices with tall windows overlook the city's government quarter, while grand staircases link the public entrances to the upper floors where senior officers once planned campaigns. During the First World War, the building became the nerve center of British military planning. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, walked its halls, conferring with generals and intelligence chiefs. Later, as Prime Minister during the Second World War, he returned often to the same corridors. Another figure who passed through its doors was T.E. Lawrence, later known as Lawrence of Arabia, who worked in the intelligence section of the General Staff after his campaigns in the Middle East. The building's formality and its constant flow of uniformed officers gave it a sense of order, but behind the closed doors, the work was fast-moving and often urgent. In the basement, away from the ceremonial offices above, the first headquarters of MI5 and MI6 took shape. These security and intelligence services began modestly, rooms crowded with desks, typewriters, and stacks of files. Couriers rode bicycles along the narrow corridors, carrying messages between departments. At a time when secure telephone lines were limited, handwritten notes and coded cables moved constantly from one section to another. The proximity of MI5, responsible for counter-espionage, and MI6, charged with gathering intelligence abroad, allowed for quick exchanges of information. This physical closeness helped build the working relationship between the two agencies in their early years. As the Second World War ended and the Cold War began, the Old War Office remained tied to the world of espionage and secrecy. One of the most notorious political scandals of the 1960s, the Profumo affair, had indirect connections to the building. John Profumo, Secretary of State for War, worked there while conducting an affair with Christine Keeler, who was also involved with a Soviet naval attaché. The possibility that classified information might have been passed to the Soviets caused alarm at the highest levels. While the political consequences were public, much of the behind-the-scenes investigation took place quietly within the Old War Office's walls. By the late 20th century, the building's role as an active military headquarters began to wane. Modern offices replaced the cramped rooms where clerks once worked beside maps and ledgers. The intelligence services moved to new, purpose-built locations, leaving behind the corridors and staircases that had served them for decades. Yet the Old War Office remained a powerful symbol of Britain's military and intelligence history. In recent years, the building has undergone a complete transformation. The Old War Office is now Raffles London, a luxury hotel that incorporates much of the original architecture. It holds 120 rooms and suites, each designed with references to the building's past. Several suites bear the names of notable figures from its history, including intelligence officers and wartime leaders. The Christine Granville Suite honors one of Churchill's most daring agents, a Polish-born woman who served in the Special Operations Executive. She worked in occupied Europe, carrying messages, organizing resistance cells, and evading capture multiple times. Her courage and resourcefulness made her one of SOE's most decorated female operatives, and the suite named for her reflects her place in the building's story. The hotel also includes the Spy Bar, a private space designed to evoke the atmosphere of intelligence gatherings. Its walls and decor recall the building's decades as a center for secret planning. In this setting, guests can sit where military and intelligence officers once discussed operations that would shape events far beyond London. The transformation has preserved many of the building's original features: the sweeping staircases, the carved stonework, and the long marble corridors, while changing its purpose from a working government office to a place of leisure. Today, visitors can walk through spaces where Churchill and Lawrence once moved, stand in the courtyards where couriers wheeled their bicycles, and stay in rooms that overlook the same streets watched by MI5 and MI6 in their earliest days. The shift from government headquarters to hotel has changed the building's function, but its physical presence still carries the weight of the decisions once made within its walls. The Old War Office remains part of London's fabric, holding a history of both open military command and the quieter work of those who served in the shadows. In the early 1940s, Madrid stood in a careful balance. Spain stayed neutral, but the city was thick with foreign officials, businessmen, and agents. The Hotel Ritz Madrid was one of the main stages for this mixture. Its marble lobby and polished dining rooms welcomed guests from both sides of the war. A German intelligence officer could dine at one table while an Allied attaché sat 3 seats away. Conversations shifted between Spanish, German, English, and French, with staff trained not to notice. The hotel's location near embassies and ministries meant that a short walk could take a guest to a meeting with a diplomat or to deliver a message in a side street. In the bar, deals could be made over sherry, and a folded document could change hands without more than a nod. Lisbon, with its open port and steady flow of refugees, became another crossroads. The Hotel Metropole was smaller than the Grand Palácio Estoril, but no less important. Its tighter spaces made it easier for an operative to watch who came and went. A table near the window in the dining room allowed a clear view of the lobby. An agent waiting there might be looking for a contact to arrive with a particular type of briefcase or wearing a pre-arranged flower in a lapel. Coded phrases could be slipped into polite conversation over soup and wine. The next day, the same table might host another pair with an entirely different agenda. The turnover of guests meant the faces changed often, but the purpose stayed the same: information in, information out. In Switzerland, the world of espionage met the culture of banking secrecy. Zurich and Geneva were filled with hotels that doubled as neutral ground for talks that could not happen elsewhere. The Dolder Grand in Zurich and the Bauer Lac by the lake's edge saw a steady flow of men in suits carrying slim, leather cases. Some held account ledgers, others microfilm or coded letters. A private dining room could serve both as a meeting place and a vault, with documents locked in a safe between sessions. In Geneva, hotels offered easy access to the League of Nations' old offices and to consulates from across Europe. Numbered accounts in nearby banks provided both funding for operations and a safe place to hide payments to agents. In such surroundings, a transfer of funds could be dressed as a business deal, and a courier could carry instructions sewn into the lining of a suit jacket without raising suspicion. Vienna after the war became a city divided into zones of occupation, each controlled by a different Allied power. The Grand Hotel, standing on the Ringstrasse, hosted guests from every sector: American, British, French, and Soviet. The city's central position in Europe made it a natural meeting point for agents from East and West. In the lobby, a CIA officer could cross paths with a KGB man, both nodding as though they were strangers. Upstairs, in private suites, meetings could be arranged through intermediaries, with each side seeking information about troop movements, political changes, or defectors. The hotel's restaurants offered a public cover for more private exchanges. A meeting over coffee could be a recruitment attempt, a test of loyalty, or the start of a negotiation for the release of a prisoner. Neutrality gave these hotels a shield. In Madrid, Lisbon, Zurich, and Vienna, no single power controlled the ground completely. Geography added to their value. Madrid connected to both the Atlantic and the Mediterranean worlds. Lisbon opened onto shipping routes to the Americas and Africa. Zurich and Geneva were surrounded by borders with Axis and Allied territories. Vienna sat at the gateway between Western Europe and the Soviet sphere. The luxury of the hotels made them attractive to diplomats and wealthy travelers, providing a natural cover for people whose real business was intelligence. The blend of comfort and secrecy was part of the attraction. At the Ritz Madrid, a visiting businessman could spend the evening in a grand suite and meet a contact in the tea room without anyone questioning his presence. At the Metropole, a journalist fleeing occupied France could stay in a modest room while passing coded reports to a British officer 2 doors away. In Switzerland, an American banker could meet a German industrialist in a hotel lounge under the pretext of discussing post-war markets, while in fact arranging a covert payment to resistance fighters. In Vienna, a cultural attaché could host a reception in the Grand Hotel's ballroom, with guests from both sides of the Cold War mingling under the chandeliers while their hosts took note of who spoke to whom. The mechanics of these exchanges were often simple. In Madrid, a bellboy could carry a sealed envelope in a stack of newspapers to a waiting guest. In Lisbon, a suitcase might be checked at the desk and claimed later by a different person using the same name. In Zurich, a lunch meeting could end with a book left on a table for someone else to collect, its pages hollowed out to hold a roll of film. In Vienna, a coat left at the cloakroom could contain papers that would be removed by a contact and replaced with something else before the owner returned. Staff often knew more than they admitted. Porters could identify regular guests who arrived under different names. Waiters might recognize that a table was booked for the same pair every Thursday, though neither stayed in the hotel. Some staff were on the payroll of one intelligence service or another, passing along notes about who met, what time they arrived, and how long they stayed. Others stayed silent out of habit or fear, understanding that their jobs depended on keeping the hotel's reputation for discretion intact. These hotels operated as neutral territory even when the world outside was anything but. The war years saw them serve as lifelines for couriers and safe havens for agents between missions. In the Cold War, they became listening posts where opposing sides could watch one another closely without stepping onto enemy soil. The architecture helped. Multiple entrances, private rooms, and service corridors allowed movement without attracting attention. Luxury kept the clientele varied enough that an unfamiliar face was rarely cause for alarm. In all these places, the line between guest and operative was thin. A man reading a newspaper in the lobby might be waiting for a friend or watching for a target. A woman at the bar could be enjoying a drink or carrying instructions from one capital to another. The same table might host a honeymoon couple one night and an arms negotiator the next. What made these hotels irresistible to intelligence networks was not only their location or their luxury, but the constant movement of people and the ease with which a meeting could be hidden in plain sight. Hotels that once hosted secret meetings now invite guests to explore that past. St. Ermin sets its artifacts in glass: raft boots with knife pockets, a hairbrush with a hidden saw, a silk scarf covered in cipher marks. Raffles London places a key on a velvet tray and calls the room the Christine Granville Suite. The Spy Bar pours drinks beneath stone arches and low lamps. At Palácio Estoril, the casino lists a note about Ian Fleming. The stories sit right where the work once happened, close enough to touch. Exhibitions, tours, and plaques translate tradecraft into simple steps. A guide opens the back of a brush and shows the shallow compartment. A visitor tries the latch and feels the click. In another room, a staff member lays out forged papers and talks through the cover story that held them together. The displays rely on plain objects and short labels: concealment, courier, disguise. They explain risk by showing tools you could carry in a pocket, not grand plans on a wall. People leave with a sense of method and the danger behind it. Themed suites bring the war inside a private space. A bedside table holds a hollow book. A map under glass marks drop zones. A framed pass on the wall carries a false name. None of it shouts. Each piece adds a layer. You sit on the edge of the bed and picture a hand sliding a note beneath a door. You hear the lift doors open and imagine a rendezvous in the lobby. Hotels know how to set a scene. Here they use that skill to point back at the work that once moved through their rooms. Cocktails tell some of the story. A bartender stirs a martini and calls it a Vesper. Another drink takes a bitter base and earns the name Section D. Guests order for the taste and for the tale. The glass lands on the bar. The name starts a short lesson. The Cold War becomes a flavor, not a fear. Names from files turn into a menu you can read with friends. Bars have always mixed strangers. In these hotels, they also mix memory with a night out. The public stays drawn to this world because it sits between danger and routine. A cigarette case on a shelf looks ordinary until you learn it held microfilm. A pair of boots turns into an escape kit. The scale feels human. You can imagine wearing the coat, or folding the scarf, or choosing the route through a city where you do not belong. The gap between a normal object and a covert task gives the mind a place to work. That gap explains why these displays last. The buildings do half the job. Marble corridors keep their echo. Stair turns and service doors still promise quick exits. A person can move from a bright lobby to a quiet side hall in 10 steps. You sense how a meeting could end the moment a watcher looked away. Even the view from a window helps. A slice of Whitehall, a rail line, or the mouth of a river ties the room to power and movement. Geography never stopped mattering. The hotels still sit at the junctions that made them useful. Rumors add texture. A guest mentions a tunnel to Parliament. Another whispers about a safe under a certain floorboard. Staff smile, neither saying yes nor no. The ambiguity keeps the spell intact. Facts sit in the cases, but rumors keep guests alert in the halls. A small plaque that names an agent can carry more force than a dramatic claim. Good curation respects that balance. It uses the building as evidence and leaves space for the mind to roam. Events fold history into daily life. A historian gives a talk in the afternoon. The room hosts a wedding that night. A book launch shares a corridor with a veterans dinner. A film crew sets up near a cabinet of gadgets while guests pass with suitcases. The mix suits hotels. They are built to handle overlap. In these spaces, past and present run on parallel tracks and meet at the bar. You can listen, learn, and then go upstairs and sleep where an agent once wrote a last letter. Legacy also needs restraint. These were sites of risk and loss as well as craft. The better hotels avoid triumph. They give credit to people who worked without fanfare. They name hard outcomes as well as clever tricks. A list of the fallen beside a case of tools sets the right tone. This is not theater. It is memory in a working house. Guests walk through it at their own pace and choose how deep to go. The draw, in the end, is the same double life that made hotels perfect for espionage. They promise comfort and privacy in equal measure. A desk clerk will call you by name while writing down the one you give. A concierge will find a car, a quiet table, or a corner room. The service that hides your stress can hide your intent. The same corridor can lead to a honeymoon suite or a back stair. That neutral face is part of the trade. It is why these buildings took on the burden they did. Picture a guest today walking the length of a carpeted hall with a keycard in hand. The lamps cast small pools of light. Behind one door, a family sleeps. Behind another, a traveler studies a laptop screen. A glass case near the lift holds a pipe with a false bottom and a scarf with a code grid. The guest slows, reads a line, and moves on. Downstairs, friends lift glasses with names from old files. Outside, taxis drift along wet streets. The staff close a ledger and dim the lights. The building returns to its watch. The war rooms are empty now, the code books burned, but in the quiet corners of certain grand hotels, shadows still linger.